Good evening and welcome to tonight's Town Talk. I'm Assistant City Manager Lisa Schaefer. This year we have planned a series of Town Talks around this fall's local option sales tax referendum. In November, Edina voters will consider a 0.5% sales tax to provide at least $39.3 million in improvements at Braemar Park, Arena, and Fred Richards Park. Tonight's Town Talk will be about plans to transform the shuttered Fred Richards Golf Course into a vibrant 43-acre city park. A Town Talk in July will focus on plans for Braemar Park, and one in September will cover the mechanics of a local option sales tax. Parks and Recreation Director Perry Vetter will speak for about 30 minutes. After his presentation, he will take questions. Those who would like to ask a question can call 800-374-0221 with conference ID 938864. Press star 1 on your telephone keypad when you are ready to ask a question during that part of the event. An operator will mute your line and place you into a queue until it is your turn to speak. We will end tonight's Town Talk when there are no more questions or at 8 p.m., whichever comes first. However, you can continue to ask questions and make comments online at bettertogetheredina.org for the next week. The online conversation closes on Tuesday, May 31st. Now, I would like to formally introduce Perry. Perry joined the City of Edina staff as Parks and Recreation Director in 2019, overseeing recreation programming, park maintenance and forestry, recreation enterprises and facilities, and Edina liquor operations. He leads a staff of 74 full-time employees, up to 500 seasonal employees, and an operating budget of approximately $33 million. After earning a degree in recreation management from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and an internship with Three Rivers Parks District, Perry began his career with the City of Minnetonka. He worked there for 21 years in 7 different positions within Parks, Recreation, and Public Works. Most recently as the Assistant City Manager and Director of Administration Services, finally before coming to Edina. Please join me in welcoming Perry to tell us more about plans for Fred Richards Park. Thank you, Perry.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to those watching along at home as we discuss the Fred Richards Park Master Plan. So this evening I'll give you a presentation about that master plan, and then as Lisa indicated, we will follow up with some questions and answers, and the conversation will continue on bettertogetheredina.org. First, just to, in addition to that, you can also find more information at edina@play.org about this project, as well as the Braemar Park and Arena improvements that are proposed. With that, let's begin tonight's presentation on the Fred Richards Park Master Plan. Just do a quick orientation of where Fred Richards Park is located. It is in the southeastern quadrant of Edina. On the west, bordered by Highway 100, on the east, York Avenue, and to the south, mainly 77th Street West, and to the north, either Crosstown or 70th, depending on how far this map goes on your screen. Just a couple of ideas or information about the southeast quadrant. It contains about 20% of Edina's parkland. However, it only encompasses about 5% of active play opportunities. Fred Richards Park Master Plan will complement greatly 2 wonderful gems of Edina's park system, and that is Arneson Acres Park, located just east of Highway 100 off of 70th, and what we also consider is the crown jewel of Edina, Centennial Lakes Park, located just east of France Avenue. To orientate you a little bit greater, you'll see this location about how Fred Richards is bordered and what land use types are located near it. And the plan you'll see this evening really complements those uses. As we look towards the north of the park, which is the upper left of your screen, is mainly single-family residential dwellings in that neighborhood. So the park progresses from its northern boundary to its southern and eastern boundary from a very passive use system to a very active use. As we get down to the southern portion or southern border of Fred Richards Park, you'll see more office, commercial use, and on the eastern edge, more multi-use dwelling and planned unit development. It'd also be adjacent or nearby to the future fire station number 2, which will be just to the east of Fred Richards Park. As we look at Fred Richards over the years, One thing that is kind of constant is that it has been changed. Change is constant in our park system, in our park realms. However, that change can often go at a fast pace or a slow pace. When we look at this, just the history of that area, we look at very early on. And the Fred Richards area was home to a massive wetland complex in the southeastern portion of Edina. Part of why the plan you'll see this evening really goes back to its roots and really embraces those wetlands that are within the area and how to assist in some of the major issues that Edina faces, such as flooding and climate change, with larger and more intense events that we see on a frequent basis. As this area progressed over time, we kind of see an area right around the 1950s and 60s and 70s up to the 80s, where Fred Richards Park was transformed from kind of that office and park use into a little bit more of an athletics feel, and then eventually into Fred Richards Park, the golf course, that closed in 2014. As you'll see on your screen this evening, this is an aerial photo from one of those phases, probably around the late 60s or early 70s. It is an undated photo. And you can kind of see this was a very intense athletic use on the eastern portion of Fred Richards, also embracing a lot of those dark areas are areas of water. On the left-turn edge, closer to High 100, you see remnants of the par 3 golf course that was there. What you see here is a photo prior to 2014 of Fred Richards Golf Course. As you can see, the land was transformed from what it was prior to that aerial photo into more of a managed wetland complex and really forcing the water to go around some of the golf amenities. Those were challenging times and a challenging decision to close Fred Richards Golf Course, and that did occur in 2014. What occurred after that was a project timeline to engage residents about what is the future of this area. And it basically had 4 phases: a discover, a dream, a design, and a do phase. That first phase occurred roughly in November and December of 2016. And there was a lot of pre-activity to engagement. There was data gathering, wetland delineations, and a lot of research. That next phase was when the dream phase, which was roughly the beginning of 2017, was where a lot of the communication and public engagement kicked off. There were community gathering meetings, community focus groups, and pop-up activities at the park to gather input. That final phase last phase was design and do, both occurring at the mid to latter part of 2017, where things were programmed. There were ideas coming into fruition, pen on paper, really kind of looking at that. And then the do phase, which highlighted those major activities, the master plan preparation, that review, and ultimately review by the Edina Parks and Recreation Commission, and then an approval on the master plan by the Edina City Council. And that's the plan that was adopted then in 2017 that we'll review in greater detail here. First, I'm not going to cover this in greater detail because the presentation will be online, but it's just a snapshot of the summary of engagement that occurred. It kind of was in 3 phases. There was an online portion, there were open house portions, there were neighborhood meetings, and then surveys online as well. About 13,000 people, or 1,300 people participated online, about 200 in person, and I think there were about 75 focus group meetings. Kind of some major questions that were asked about Fred Richards in the future were, what would help you thrive? That was one question online. The next one was, what would make you feel safe? And the third is, what would make you feel more connected to your community? After all that input and discussion, Fred Richards ended up with 3 major themes. So when we look at writing that next chapter of Fred Richards, those themes were: 1, to restore nature's role. The second, create pathways for play and health. And the third theme was to invite the whole community. And I'll touch briefly on each of those phases as I describe the areas of the park in particular. This is another graphic of the park about just how those themes interact with the park itself. Obviously, nature's role with the wetland complex, the quiet serenity of nature and habitat that exists in the area, creating plays and healthy pathways, getting people out and engaged, not only in the active portions of the park, but in some of the more passive areas. Walking, biking, accessing the park throughout a variety of seasons, not just in the spring, summer, and fall, but also in the winter. And then inviting the whole community and how the community could access the site. Those three themes ended up into the adopted Fred Richards Park Master Plan. There are 5 components, 4 yet to be completed of that. The first is the nature bank. The second, the central green. The third area, called the Great Lawn. The fourth area, called the Loop. And the fifth area that was completed in 2019 was the neighborhood play area, located just on the east side, primarily serving the park lawn area. So the first, restoring nature's role. As I mentioned earlier, this area, and Edina in particular, has a lot of concern about flooding, stormwater management, especially as we look at what climate change is doing in the future. More intense, quick, severe storms, and how can Fred Richards play a role in helping mitigate that? So the idea here was to create a nature bank, wetland banking, restoration of a landscape function, and keeping all of that viable soil on site. So trying to solve that increased flood pressure where about 13 acres of wetland complex could be created and about 23 acres of just natural area on the western portion of the park that primarily buffers that northern single-family residential area. The idea is to keep that soil on site to help create other functions of the park system. Here we see what's typically called a cross-section, where you're looking basically through the park and what it could be. On the left, you see kind of that providing opportunity of a buffer up against the property lines, where we would enhance natural plantings and forestry additions to that border, removing some of that soil, creating that wetland complex and floodplain storage, and really looking at kind of the gamut from wildlife habitat, improving our water quality, reducing our CO2 emissions, helping with biodiversity, reducing air pollution, and obviously also another piece of that is flood protection. So really looking at that cross-section of what that ecosystem of Fred Richards Park could complement for our park system. Kind of a top-down view is what you're seeing of the master plan here. Is really the red line that kind of intersects this portion of the park is the existing 9 Mile Creek Trail system. So when we look at that restored or nature bank area, it's primarily to the west and north of the 9 Mile Creek Regional Trail. There would be areas for pollinator gardens, using some of the pathways as stone steps. Obviously, as indicated, wetland restoration, pollinator areas, water play features, areas to view wildlife and get close through boardwalks and seating and contemplation areas. And really an area where we can return back to nature and play in those areas. Progressing to the second major theme, which is creating pathways for play and health. You'll see this major theme kind of overlaps with a large portion of the park, from the western edge into the more active area, which is the central area. The first is creating that pathway for enhancing our pollinators. As I mentioned, improving the quality of our restored areas and additional plantings that go towards more of our climate action plans, more of those specific plantings and enhancements that we can add in that area. The second piece of that is contemplation. Really, when you're in this area of the park, it is a little bit more serene, more protective, quiet. You can be by yourself or with your close friends and family that you go to the park with, and really enjoying just that nature and serenity piece of that area. The third is that improved habitat, as I spoke of. A number of people that I've talked to about this master plan are worried about, what is the future of the park? Are you going to pave over everything? And that's absolutely not. We want to create this habitat. We want to create this area of restored function to those wetlands and to those pieces to attract that wildlife. Water. Creating pathways with water is understanding, interacting with and playing with water is often a better way to educate and create those future visions for how we can adapt to climate change and really understand the changes that we're experiencing here in our community. The traditional play features. Obviously, a major function of this park is a community level playground. It would be obviously accessible in reducing any barriers. But we've also looked at this as how can we have a play area too that also supports others in our community from a sensory level, a sensory-friendly focus to this play area. I've had conversations with representatives from Gillette's Children's Hospital about how they could help us design areas where children can play in a different manner than they're used to. So not only just that traditional play, but non-traditional, supporting those with sensory needs. And also there would be an area for winter exploration. Obviously, Minnesota is experiencing its major season right now, which is road construction season. Behind that, I think people's least favorite season is the winter season. However, in Edina, it's a little bit different. A strong tradition of skating and use of the outdoors. And Fred Richards would be no different. There would be opportunities for snowshoeing, interacting with winter activities and programmatic elements that we could bring to the park. The other area is the loop. So having a small area that people could walk through, having small trail and bike skills equipment for our younger users so they don't have to worry about being on a regional trail or being near streets and things like that they could enhance their skills on a small loop level. And the last theme was inviting that whole community. And what does that mean, inviting the community? It means all of the things that Fred Richards Park could support in the future. From the morning walkers that would use its trail system to different activities throughout the day, parent clubs meeting and using the site for a variety of different reasons. After work, people getting together and using some of the more active pieces of equipment to participating in a lot of our programmatic elements that we could bring to the site, and then kind of culminating in that evening use where the bikers are headed home, the walkers are headed home, and the park becomes quiet again, reflecting overnight until the next day's users arrive. Some of the functions that would support inviting that whole community are enhanced in the central green. That would be the Hammock Grove. A very popular activity that is occurring now in a lot of our park system, often called mocking, is coming down with hammocks, people reading, enjoying the day. As I mentioned, there would be unique play elements from traditional to sensory-friendly to accessible. There would be obviously swings in a rec room feel with outdoor aspects of table tennis, lawn games, even a small yoga deck that could be programmed for reflection and activity. There would be the clubhouse we'll get to next, and the front lawn, and basketball and pickleball. When we look at the Great Lawn and kind of that neighborhood park to the east, a lot of that soil that we would transform and keep on site from creating those wetlands that traditionally want to be there would be brought in to enhance the park from an elevation standpoint to help block out that activity from the surrounding areas. There would be a great lawn that could be used for a variety of different activities. And as I mentioned on the eastern edge, the picnic shelter and neighborhood playground that was added in 2019 complements the site. When we look at that great lawn, I wanted to be clear, it's not a lit athletic field. In essence, it is just what it is, a great lawn. It can be used for a variety of different purposes. Edina has a rich tradition of serving its athletic partners throughout the community, and this really isn't that. This is more of supporting those non-traditional play elements. So the field would not be lit. It could be for a variety of uses. It could be used for camps and clinics and serving the neighborhood. As I mentioned, it does not have a lot of active space in this quadrant of the city, to various other uses. There could be music. There could be just pop-up activities. It could be used for reflection or programmatic senses that we, as a department, would program. Also, it could be used in the winter use. Next, I'll share with you a variety of just imagery that was created for the park of what the vision for the master plan would bring. And the first is kind of that pollinator area, or pollinator play area. Really building in an area where the plants, the activity, the participants, the reflection all come together. So really looking at areas where kids can be reinforced in learning to understand and play within nature. Now, we don't have a lot of these areas in neighborhood parks or mini parks because it traditionally requires a trade-off between, would you like a traditional active playground or would you like to be more nature focused? And a lot of times our neighborhood parks and our mini parks traditionally just have that traditional play. One of the advantages of the Fred Richards Park Master Plan is it has both of those options for us. We can have this type of nature play within it where pollinator gardens and building logs and climbing apparatus can really be one within nature. It provides just a tremendous level of different experience. The next are some of those boardwalks near and around the nature banking. What that means is people could get out within nature, contemplate, reflect, obviously enhance plantings throughout. There could be times when this is low with water. There could be times where this is high with water, depending on the various circumstances. But these boardwalks would be accessible and available to the public to kind of reflect and get into nature from a different viewpoint. The next image is of that great lawn, and as you can see, some of those buffering or hill planting or hill creation in the background, which helps serve as a buffer, really allows people to use just open green space in any sort of manner they want. Could be for a picnic, could be flying a kite, could be just playing with your friends, could be meeting another family and getting out and enjoying kind of a great lawn feel. This last picture obviously is that same kind of area in the winter and what that could support. Obviously the 9 Mile Creek Trail is plowed in the winter, which provides another level of access to this location. But really just being able to go out and enjoy this area throughout the 4 seasons would be of tremendous benefit. And last but not least, I could not recommend enough how often pickleball is brought up in our community about expanding. And I think one of the great assets of the Fred Richards Park Master Plan is it helps solve that need of pickleball demand we have in our community. For those that aren't familiar, it's a growing and popular sport that is taking the country by a wave. We currently have 5 courts at Roslyn Park, often very busy. That's at the Moody Pickleball area. And what we see is there's just a tremendous demand beyond that. So part of this master plan includes the creation and addition of 8 pickleball courts, which would kind of serve as a complex that would help lessen that demand, provide greater opportunity within the city, and really reinforce this new and budding sport that Edina residents have truly embraced. Whether it's young or old, it's an activity that sees no age limit and is extremely popular, as I mentioned. I think that's one of the great things about this master plan is it really was ahead of its curve adopting this in 2017, recognizing that increased demand of pickleball and its growth. So in summary of the Fred Richards Park Master Plan, it does contain those 4 elements that still remain. That would be the nature bank on the western and northern edge, the central green right off of the clubhouse area, the Great Lawn, as we call it, and to the north, that small little nature loop. The area on the eastern edge, as I mentioned, the park lawn play area was completed in 2019. So in essence, the Fred Richards Park Master Plan really has these 3 major themes in summary: restore nature's role, create pathways for play and health, and then inviting the whole community. With that, that'll conclude my presentation on Frederick's Park Master Plan, and we can turn it over to the question and answer portion of this evening.
Okay, thank you, Perry. We will now move on to the question and answer portion of the event. Reminder that if you have a question, please call 800-374-0221 with conference ID 938-864. Press *1 on your telephone keypad when you are ready to ask a question during this portion of the event. An operator will mute your line and place you on hold, and you'll remain in the queue until it's your turn to speak.
We do not have any callers on the line at this point. There is a slight delay with the broadcast, though, so I would recommend we wait a minute or so before adjourning. My clock shows that it's 7:27, so I'll come back to you when I have a caller or at 7:28, whichever is first.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions on the line?
It is 7:28, and I don't have any callers as of now, and my operator advises that no one is... Oh, we do have someone dialing in. Just bear with me 1 minute, please.
Okay.
And then will you say, like, better together? Yeah. Try to hit about 25 minutes.
I do have a caller on the line, but that caller has not yet entered the queue to speak. As a reminder, if you would like to speak or ask a question, please press *, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. With that, I do have a caller. Operator, will you please unmute the line of Mr. Ben Joyce? And Mr. Joyce, please begin by stating your full name and address for the record.
This is Benjamin Joyce, and my address is 7213 Trillium Lane.
Go ahead with your comments or questions.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you're prepared to talk at all about the clubhouse area and what the plan is with that particular part of the master plan.
Thank you, Ben. Yes, a portion of the Frederick's Park Master Plan, and I apologize if I didn't cover it in greater enough detail, would be the conversion in addition to the existing structure. And while the master plan didn't identify exactly what that would be, it would kind of be on the realm of a cafe, restaurant, dining, possibly tap room function. That was the idea at the time. Obviously, that's over the last 2 years, that has been a very challenging environment in the private sector. It's not something the city would run internally, but more as an outsource, as an enterprise. So I think if the plan was successful to move ahead to that funding phase, that would be that next portion of what does exactly that cafe, restaurant, tap room look like? Who would those partners be that we would bring in to help from an operational perspective? And if I didn't mention it before, part of that clubhouse also would have indoor year-round restrooms. And I think if I neglected that piece, I think when you're bringing kids to the play area for a long amount of time, that's a very key component. So from a trailhead and a play perspective, that would also be a portion of that. But the idea still remains to kind of have that cafe, restaurant, tap room feel, and what that operation or who's operating that would have to be one of those next steps that we embrace once the plan moves into greater design detail.
I appreciate the answer. Thank you so much.
Mr. Joyce. Our next caller tonight is Ms. Lori Groats. Operator, will you please unmute her line? And Ms. Groats, please begin by stating your full name and address for the record.
Hello.
Hello.
Lori Groats, 5513 Park Place. I have a couple of questions, please. On the plan, how many acres are dedicated for wetland? How large will the Great Lawn be in number of acres? And also the amount of land for pickleball and the size for that. And also, at one time, the plan had that they would be using the wetlands areas to be selling stormwater credits. Is that still in the plan? And if so, how much space would be dedicated for that?
So if I
Are you there?
Yes. And I don't have all of your answers with me this evening, but we can post those updates to bettertogether.org when we have them. The plan includes 13 acres of wetland banking. Those are those credits that you referred to. It has 23 acre-feet of flood storage. I don't have the exact dimensions of the Great Lawn, but it would be roughly the size of a soccer field if that were something that you could compare that to. And I don't have the acres of the pickleball complex, but it is 8 dedicated pickleball courts. But we can add those answers on those other acreage to the Better Together site in response to that question.
So would the pickleball area be larger than the Great Lawn area?
The pickleball area would fit inside of the Great Lawn area.
So would the pickleball area would be half the size of the Great Lawn, or a third the size, or 3/4 of the size?
It's hard to scale at the moment, but I can add those answers to what those dimensions are to the Better Together website, so you have precise answers.
I see, okay. Yeah. And then also, they're looking to pay for this through a local optional sales tax. I don't know whether or not you can answer this question, but I have a feeling perhaps you can. So the funding for maintaining and taking care of this park, will that also be coming out of the sales tax money, or will the maintenance of this park be coming out of your Park and Rec budget?
The construction only, the construction costs are what can be paid out of the local option sales tax. The operational functions of the park, which we're currently maintaining now, would come out of our operational dollars for the Parks and Recreation Department.
I see, but I'm assuming that the operational costs will be much greater because essentially, right, what is there now is basically nothing much to be maintained other than perhaps cutting grass and so forth like that. So, okay, thank you so much.
I do not have any other callers on the line at this time, so Assistant Manager Schaefer, please feel free to wrap up the meeting.
Okay, that is all for tonight's presentation. As a reminder, you can continue to ask questions about the Fred Richards Park Master Plan online at bettertogetheredina.org for the next week. The online conversation will remain open until Tuesday, May 31st. Our next Town Talk will be held at 7 p.m. on Monday, July 18th, and Perry will be back to tell us about the master plan for Braemar Park, so please join us at that point. Thank you.